It is August 2022 and everybody's talking about the cost of living. In this video, I'd like to talk a little bit about the origins of the cost of living crisis, what it's really made up of, and how, if at all, we can improve our situation. This video leans a lot on a previous video linked in the description where I talk about what inflation really is. To recap that video, inflation is what we see as price rises when over a period of time the money supply increases faster than the supply of goods. So that can happen in one of two ways. Either we pump a lot of new money into the market or some goods disappear for whatever reason. Deflation is the opposite. Regarding the cost of living crisis, we really have to go back a number of years to find the origins of the current situation. Obviously, every point in time is the sum of all the points that came before it. Thankfully, we don't have to go that far back, but we do have to look back to at least 2008, I'd argue. Now, why is that? Well, imagine that you find a sick man on the ground. He's bleeding from a wound and he's unconscious. And you take him to the hospital. In the hospital, they clean up his wound, they put a bandage on it, put him in a bed, and say, "That's it, he's all better now." And you say, "But he's still unconscious." And they say, "Not being awake is just the new normal." Well, this pretty much describes the attitude towards the global financial crisis. This is a graph of the Bank of England's base rate. So that's the rate they give to banks who deposit money with them. And if we see here back to January 1900, the rate has been between 2.5% and close to 17.5%. Then, come 2008, we dropped to near zero. And we have been at near zero since then. It's only recently that we start seeing some signs of life. Now, there are several reasons for this. It was part of the overall response package to the financial crisis of 2008. Make sure that there's money around so people can spend it, so that we can keep, quote unquote, the wheels on and the people who make things making things. The problem with this and the rest of the response package is that we also printed a lot of new money. That is to say that central banks made up money out of nowhere and distributed it largely through the banks. The banks were all bankrupt at the time, and so this new money effectively functioned as a new lease on life for them. If you're a banker, you're holding on to the money that might save your organization. Who are you going to lend it to? Only the safest possible loans are going to be made. That is to say, you're not going to lend to some new entrepreneurial venture, but you may well want to lend it to someone who's buying property because there's an asset there as collateral. And that has fueled a housing boom, really more accurately put, an asset boom in all of the Western countries. So if we look at this chart here, we see the money supply is the blue line and the house price index for the UK. Money supply here is measured by M4, and both of these curves are indices with base in 2015. And we can see that though the house price took a knock in 2008, it started to recover quite rapidly. And as we start printing money, the two start trending upwards together. It's not a one-to-one relationship. It looks that way because these are indices, but still the point remains. As money supply goes up, house prices go up. In the UK, if we look at stock prices in the US, the orange line here is the S&P 500. It's on an upward trend, and the money supply is most certainly also at an upward trend. to the point where we can see that in 2006 we had almost half as much money as we did in 2015, and in 2021 we had almost 175% as much money as we did in 2015. This, of course, has increased stock prices all over, even though American companies are on average no more or less productive than they were, and certainly not 200% as productive as they were in 2015. Finally, let's look at gold prices. Now, there's a huge spike in the gold price after 2015. You can see again, money supply goes up. These are UK numbers, again the M4. Gold price drops a bit after the spike, after the initial phase of the global financial crash, but now it's going up again. And why is it that these prices are all going up? It's because assets, long-lived assets, are excellent inflation hedges. What does that mean? That means that when prices go up, more money comes into the system. You can't make more. You can't make more houses nearly as fast as you can make more money. You certainly can't make new gold. And you can't make new companies in the S&P 500. So, as more and more money comes into the system, especially as it comes in through people in the banking system who can see inflation coming, you would expect them to put their money into long-lived assets, and that's exactly what has happened. Now, as they do that, the money's not going to stay in the long-lived assets. It's going to be transferred from the banks who get the assets on their balance sheets to other people, and then it's going to move around the system. And that's what's happening now. So, the first stage we see is the asset inflation. Gold goes up, platinum goes up, silver goes up, wheat goes up, oil goes up, everything. Then production prices start rising. If you make something, you're going to need some land, you're going to need some buildings, you're going to need energy. All of these things are getting more expensive, your product gets more expensive. You charge more, consumer prices go up. And finally, and that's what we're seeing now, certainly in the UK, but largely I think throughout the Western world, is workers are unionizing. They are leaving jobs more readily. They're desperately looking for more compensation, higher salaries, to respond to the higher consumer prices. This is all natural, and it flows as the effects of the inflation flow through the system. So, that leads us to where we are now. And there are, as we saw in the inflation presentation, only really two approaches to tackling inflation as a problem. I suppose you could do both, but either you can try and constrain the money supply so that the amount of goods in the system rise quicker than the amount of money, and thereby bring inflation down over time, or you can keep the money supply the same and try to raise the amount of goods that's being brought into the system, again, to balance things out and bring down inflation. These two things are perfectly exemplified by the two prime ministerial candidates in the UK at present. Rishi Sunak, who wants to constrain the money supply. He calls it saving, but government can't really save. They don't make any money. They can spend less. Or Liz Truss, his opponent, who wants to try and grow the economy out of it. Growing the economy obviously means injecting more goods into the system for the same amount of money, and again, that would lower inflation. So, what do we think? What can we say reasonably about these two plans? Well, the pro of the Sunak plan is that it's predictable. The government knows how much money they're spending in various sectors, and they can simply cut those numbers. The downside of this plan is that it's a commitment to pain. Whoever used to get the money that is now being saved or removed from the system are simply not going to be getting it, and they'll feel a shortfall. The Truss approach, if it works, is certainly more desirable in that if you can increase the amount of goods in the system without touching the money, then while none of us are getting richer as we should have been, at least we're not getting poorer. None of us are going to feel that effect of getting poorer, and that tends to weigh more heavily on people than missing out on money they should have had but didn't know that they had coming. The downside of her approach is that it is highly uncertain. It's going to require true feats of statesmanship and economics, and whether or not you think the political structures are up to that task, I'll leave that as an exercise to the listener. If we look just at the ability to constrain the money supply, where can we do it? Well, we can look through the things that government spends money on. So we've got the military spending. There's some trouble here. There's a big commitment. We're committed to spending at least 2% of GDP under the NATO rules, but against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine, etc. Is it really wise to start cutting back massively on military spending? These are certainly questions that will be raised if you try to do it. Same, we can cut down spending on policing, but London right now is going through a knife crime epidemic. I understand the US is seeing a rise in all kinds of crime as well, which is to be expected in a period where people are, generally speaking, getting poorer, more desperate. So do you start cutting back on the police force? Is that a good idea? Is that money well spent? Or should we try to keep the police as big as it is, maybe even increase it to combat the increasing unrest? Again, questions that will be raised. The NHS, the English Health Service or National Health Service, I don't believe there's any chance of taking money away from that. It is the holy cow of English politics. I don't think it's politically viable. It may well be possible, but yeah, I just don't see that happening. Then we've got transfers. Transfers here is everything that is effectively benefits payments, energy subsidies, anything, any amount of money that the government pays to help out primarily poor people or people who for one reason or another cannot join society on an even footing. Are we going to cut there? I'd say it's almost inevitable. These are always the funds that end up getting cut when these things happen. But against the backdrop of the cost of living crisis, this might be more difficult than it has ever been before, because you're going to get a lot of people really struggling to feed themselves, warm their homes in the coming winters. So cutting money on there, it's also going to be difficult, even though, as I said, it's usually where we end up cutting. And then finally, you can raise interest rates. Because if I can get 4% by just putting my money in the bank, I'm not gonna do anything else with it. I'm not gonna go and make an investment where I could maybe get 2%. So I put it in the bank, and that takes it out of circulation, at least for now. Those are the options. Although the interest rate is definitely the most potent weapon in this arsenal, it's going to have huge ramifications. Much of the UK is on variable rate mortgages. This may well be the same in the US, and that means if you raise interest rates to double, triple of what they are now, which you would have to do to combat the inflation rate currently running at close to 10%, lots and lots of people are going to struggle to service their mortgages, to remortgage. You're going to put some people out onto the street. That may well have to happen, but again, it's going to be an unpopular choice, and people may well decide to vote in some left-wing politician who'd make Jeremy Corbyn look like Ronald Reagan in response to that. And could you really blame them? I don't know. It'd be devastating for the country, but some people might be better off. If we look instead at the growth promotion that Liz Truss is advocating, there's only really three ways to add more goods to an economy. You can get some more unemployed people into employment, that is to say, people who weren't making things can start making things. You can try to increase productivity so that the people who are making things make more things for the same. Or you can try to lower the cost of imports. That would usually be by negotiating better trade deals, lower tariffs, preferential rates, anything you can think of. This would normally be slow. I'd expect any kind of negotiation on that basis to take years. And it's doubtful that there's enough money to be made that way, in any short-term fashion anyways, to really get us out of the current situation. So really the only thing left to Liz Truss is to try to increase productivity. The downside of that is she's going to need to put government money into that. So that means she's increasing the money supply, and if that doesn't translate into the desired productivity increases, then all that she's done is make the situation worse. So that's the situation that we're in, the options that we're facing. All in all, it's not going to be a great winter, and no matter which way we go, there's definitely pain ahead.